this off the society, and I think we should have, see if my technical training is good here. There we go. 1996. People think of historic societies in certain areas having been around since the 1800s and so forth and so on. We're just 28 years old, about not quite 28 years old yet. And what this group has accomplished in those 28 years is absolutely amazing. What they accomplished in their first year was absolutely amazing, because within a year they had organized, they had gotten their 501c3, were already holding lecture series, and were on the road. Do I need to be somewhere?
Perfect, right there. Thank you.
Can't zoom without the zoom meeting, right? Okay.
Thank you.
And if you look at some of the names, and many of them are gone, they've passed on, and were a big help in getting this started. But Lynn Morthland, of course, now is Lynn Evans. Ken Tyson, Greg's dad, was one of the founders. Nancy Campbell, Gordon and Blanche Sheldon, on and on and on and on. Meeting was called by a chairperson, and oddly enough, our first president was named Sandy Planasek also. So Sandy has made the loop. He is now president again. And she and RJ, her husband, when RJ was alive, were two of the founding members. But the society formed, and one of the questions right out of the chute was, are we going to be museum? What era are we going to cover? Those kinds of things. And this got so exciting at one point in time that they actually talked about a small gauge railway running all the way from downtown to the Historic Societies Park and on down to the lake shore. They talked about a maritime presence down on the lake shore. They talked about, I mean, it was wild what all the things. There was going to be a massive apple orchard with an apple press and making apple cider and just all kinds of things. Then we discovered that somewhere along the line, we'd need about 2,200 volunteers and a couple $1 million a year. And so we started paring things down just a touch. A couple questions that always come up. Why 1880 to 1917? Because of all the historic things around here with the state park, which I'm a part of, and all the different historic venues in the area, that is an era that was not covered. It was an era that was not covered. It was also what was called the era of great change. If you think about 1880 to 1917, everything changed. Airplanes, telephones, telegraph, everything changed. So the world changed dramatically in that 37-year period. The other thing is we did not want to deal with wartime. We did not want to deal with the Civil War, and we did not want to deal with the First World War. So we settled on the era of 1880 to 1917. Now, there was only one problem with that. The logo that we were using at that time when we first founded had a ferry boat and a bridge. And neither of them really fit into that time period other than the ferry boats could. So we had a little committee. My wife, Dana, Sandy Planasek, and at that time, Fred Gray, who is now another one of our ex-board members who's passed away, was on that committee and came up with the logo. Where's our logo? I don't see our logo. But the logo we have today, the gracious 1880s lady in front of the historic building, was formed because of that time span that we decided upon. So we started the lecture series almost immediately. And you recognize that young gentleman?
So young.
Phil Porter and his beaver hat lecture. Phil Porter just retired a couple years ago as the director of the state parks after serving for many, many years. And I think is probably still giving his beaver hat lecture somewhere. And of course, Lynn at that time, Lynn must have gotten married in 1996. Because in 96, she was Moran, and in 1997, she's Lynn Evans. So right in there, she married Jim Evans, one of our lead interpreters at the fort. But there are some of the first people from the lecture series. Miriam Pepler, of course, who's gone now. One thing I want to remind you is we're talking about history. Years ago, we had Ken Tyson and oh gosh, who was the other lady? Can't remember her name, but they were both in their 90s at the time. And we were out at the village in the pavilion, and they were talking about Mackinaw City in their childhood. And Ken got up and talked about this was here and this was here, and we did this and we did this. And then the lady followed him and said, no, Ken, this was here, this was here, that was there. So we had two 90-year-olds dueling about where things were in Mackinaw City when they were children. So, and I found in going through some of this early on, I found that my memory, just going back 20-some years, was not accurate. So and I remember one night sitting in a presentation by a quote local historian who was an expert in Sheboygan area history. And we were talking about the town of Freedom, which was out between Mackinaw. And the question came up about the railroads, and that the railroads were the lifeblood of Freedom at that time. And this is about the time we got the Freedom School, which you'll see some pictures of out in our village. And he said, well, the one thing that was always lacking in Freedom is they never had a depot. And I happened to be sitting there holding the book Memories of Mackinaw with a nice big picture of the Freedom Depot, which was in fact, Ray Roth and I spent weeks trying to find the foundation. We were told where the foundation of the railroad depot was. We never found it. But there was a depot in Freedom. And again, you've got one historian saying yes, you've got another historian saying no. So if you think I'm nuts about something I say tonight, I probably am. So just let it slide, okay? Some of the more early people, Bill Paquette. Who is this gentleman? I do not know who that gentleman is.
Bill Barrett.
Pardon?
Bill Barrett. Bill Barrett.
Oh, really? Okay. And Snyder's and the Paquettes and the Caswells, the Campbells, almost all those folks are gone now. Here we are when we got started. The land had belonged to the McCormick Foundation. And the McCormick Foundation gave it to originally Mackinaw City. And Mackinaw City couldn't find a use for it, so Mackinaw City gave it to Emmet County. Emmet County couldn't find a use for it. So in 2004, there was an agreement made between the village of Mackinaw City and this now fledgling historic society, which had only been around for 7 years, that the land could come back to the historic society, to Mackinaw City, but to be managed by the historic society as a historic village. That was the only purpose it could be used for. So it came back to us and we started the historic village. We started first with a couple of buildings. First thing we did was we built an artifacts building. And the artifacts building we built, we wouldn't recognize it today because it now houses a gorgeous general store and it houses a 1922 white automobile. So, but we built it as an artifacts building. And that takes us back to this original choice of dates to cover with the society. When we first started, there were members on the board who wanted to try to cover everything. And all of a sudden we were getting, quote, artifacts from the 1960s, the 1950s. I remember one day we walked out there, here sits a Mickey Mouse bouncer on the porch, you know, with our quote antique collection. And we just begin to get everything. And a bunch of it was junk, frankly, which was another one of the reasons why we decided we had to really limit down what we were going to collect and what we weren't going to collect. But then we found down on Central Avenue, this lovely building that had originally sat in the corner of the cemetery. And it was called a pest house. Pest short for pestilence, meaning plagues, illnesses, so forth and so on, straight from the Bible. It had been built in the late 1800s and had sat there for many, many years until the advent following the flu in 1919. Following the flu, the advent of vaccines, when smallpox and all that basically got eradicated. It got hauled down Central Avenue by teams of horses, as we understand it, and served as a machine shop. And for years and years and years, it served as a machine shop. Then finally, it was in such bad shape that somebody said, going to get rid of it, and we latched onto it, had it moved out to Heritage Village, and renovated it into what is now the pest house, the pestilence house. And this is the process we went back. And back in those days, that's Dick Mole there. This is, there again, that's Sandy, that's me, that's RJ, and that's Ray Roth. We did almost all our own work. We were young people. We were young people back then. Unfortunately, some things happened. And but we did a lot of our own work. We moved it in, and was one of the first buildings to arrive on the 43 acres of the park. Then cleaning it up, we had just there's our patient. That's our smallpox patient that we're painting there, and that's Sid Roth and Gussie Williams doing a little cleaning there. The other thing that this opened up is it opened up the advent of school visits. Once the pest house was open, then school classes became interested coming out and learning about historic diseases, so forth and so on. So that started to a really large school program. One of the next buildings, and this is one of the ones that kind of gets us into the serendipity thing. Everybody know what the definition of serendipity is? Serendipity is a surprise with good consequences. That's the easiest definition. Something that is a surprise but has good consequences. And way back, we used to do a 10-year plan. Every time we would do a 10-year plan, serendipity would get involved. Something would happen and we'd have to change it. This was one of them. We got a phone call from the Plant family out at Old Mackinaw Road that they had on their property in the woods, all covered up, the old Freedom School. The actual Freedom School had been part of the early schools in Mackinaw City. So they said, would you like it? Now, I wish I had the original picture, because this was all sitting in a forest and there were trees growing right up through the floor, through the porch. I mean, it was an absolute mess. And this is after we cleaned it out and we said, we'll take it. And at that time, we had no clue how to renovate a building like that. It was larger than the pest house was. The pest house was at least in one piece. We didn't have to move it far. So we really didn't know how we were going to do this. And we decided, let's give it a rip. And back in those days, Jeff Lawson was the village manager, was a tremendous benefactor of the historic village. He was a visionary and he really worked side by side with us in getting all this stuff set up. But this was the interior of the way it looked and we got our hands on it. It had been closed in sometime in the 1930s, built in the 1880s and closed in the 1930s. here we are. It's when we had one of our first historic festival. The building was sitting up on blocks. The foundation had been done, but it hadn't been moved yet. And then we moved it on to the foundation. And there's again, Kevin Vashow, another one of our board members who's passed on, myself, Jeff Lawson again, and Sid Roth. Sid and Ray now live out in Washington, by the way. But this was our first festival. And at the time we called it the Summer Celebration and held it on the 4th of July. 4th of July, we discovered had too much competition, and the summer festival idea, the summer celebration idea, we found out if we called it a festival, we got free publication in like 50 different publications. So we had free advertising just simply by changing the name. So it became the Historic Festival. And again, that first year we went downtown, and one of the groups downtown for the 4th of July had a Civil War band performing at the band shell, and we hijacked them and had them come out and play music out at the historic village. They actually played one of the first times we did a flag raising and had the national anthem played as it was played back in the 1800s. Starting in 2006, the roadway you now see going into the village, we purchased 62 trees from Hoffman Nursery. We planted 52 of them on the roadway in. So there's 52 trees, and we planted 10 of them in the village. Of those 62 trees that we planted in 2006, we've had to replace one. Every single one of them has lived but one. And that one somehow took a dive about 4 years ago, and we replaced it. So all 62 trees are still standing. And the amazing part of this was we decided, I don't remember exactly what we paid for the trees, but we decided to sell them as memorials for $200 a piece, thinking that maybe over a year and a half, with 62 of them, we'd raise close to $13,000 to help put in the roads, which were not all finished at that time. They sold out within a month, gone. And you'll find there's a legend out on the board out there that shows who all the trees are dedicated to, and it's amazing to just sit there and read through those names of the people who paid 200. Some of them bought 3 and 4 of them, and just bought those trees and sold out in a month. Oh, let me back that up just a second. There's Jeff Lawson on his knees digging dirt. I mean, that's how involved Jeff was in the village. Lou Vasilakis is one of those unsung heroes. You won't see Lou in a lot of these, but Lou did a lot of work for us. And I think that's Ray over there.
It's like AJ. Yeah.
But here's the trees coming in, and that's Ray and
That's AJ.
Gene Cooley carrying the trees in. Now, I have this thing going. How many of you, anybody not been through that tunnel of trees out there? Everybody seen it? I'm gonna hang around till those trees touch. And I figure that's gonna be another 30 years or so. So in 30 years when they touch, I'll get up here and do an update, okay? Yes, these two are kind of unrelated. The shack is, this was on the Greeby Farm property. And it was sunken about up to here in the ground, just sunken. Ray Roth and I worked 40 hours a week for about 15 weeks, digging that thing out of the ground, we found out that the floor was sitting on nothing but the ground, and all the beams were completely rotted out. So we had to dig it out, put new beams in, put a new floor in it. And then the question was how to get it out of there. So we dug with a bulldozer in front of it and got all the stuff cleared away. And then we got underneath it and would jack up one corner and put a block under it. Jack up the next corner, put a block under it. Then we'd move it, get another block until we had it about 5 feet off the ground. And he and I were underneath it, putting in the floorboards, getting the floorboards in. And we heard this massive creaking noise and the whole thing started to go. And we thought we were really going to be part of the structure for the next 150 years, but it stopped. And we gave a big sigh of relief, and Ray was probably pushing 75 at that time. And I've never seen two guys move so fast. Get nothing. But we finally got it up. And when we build it on 6x6 skids with ski type shapes in the front. So that building can be pulled around anywhere on the premise. There's hooks in the front, you can just pull it anywhere on the premise. And we have moved it a couple times. We have moved it a couple times. Fascinating part about those buildings, those were all over the north. They used them in lumber camps, they used them in sugar camps, they used them on farm communities, they used them everywhere. And they are made up, every one of those is a panel and they're all bolted together. So you could unbolt those, take them apart and move the whole thing by, usually back then, by horse and wagon, set it up in a new spot. The picture on the right is, again, back to serendipity. At our first festival, our very first festival is the only time in the history of the festival that we've been rained out. And it was lightning, so we had to ask the people to leave the premise. But just prior to the lightning starting, we had been teaching a group from Bliss, a musical group from Bliss, had been teaching square dancing. And a couple was there with their granddaughters. And we had been teaching their granddaughters to square dance. And at first, everybody was a little bit reluctant to get up. But good old brave Sandy and someone else got up and took these kids who wanted to learn and started this square dancing going. Then everybody had to vacate. Well, about an hour later, sun comes out, everybody comes back. And that's in the days when we were charging admission. And when they came back, there was a couple came up and they said, we had paid before, but I'd like to pay for the car behind me. And Norm Snyder was working the gate that day. And Norm said, fine, no problem. And the guy said, you mind if I give you a check? Norm said, no, that's all right. So he gave him a check. And as the guy drove in, Norm looked at the check and it was for $5,000. And he called me right away on the cell phone. He said, Bill, guy coming through right now just gave me a check for $5,000. And he said, what should I do? And I said, cash it. This is when we had no money. Go cash it. And but the gentleman came in, talked to me. Turns out it was Martin Jan and his wife. And they started that year giving us $25,000 a year. And 2 years, they gave us $50,000 from the Jan Family Foundation and the Jan Foundation. And Martin passed away a couple of years ago. Pat still donates to this day. And I think the total is now somewhere around $600,000 that they've donated. And how many of you remember Joan Pepper?
Oh, yeah.
Joan Pepper, you know, she was very direct character. She walked up to me one day about this same time and said, Bill, what are you guys doing out there? So we spent some time talking about it. And she said, would $10,000 help you? Let me think about it, yes. And she said, well, if 10 would help, would 20 help more? And I said, it would be fabulous. She donated $20,000. And from then on, from her family foundation, she gave $10,000 a year until she passed away in 2016. Her family still occasionally donates from her family foundation. So that's how we begin to build from you talk about serendipity, from a simple conversation to $20,000, from a teaching some kids the square dates to now over $500,000. It's kind of amazing. You'll see more of the yawns later. This was like I say, this was our 5-year master plan. And we were working with the village, with Jeff Lawson and Steve Schnell. And that was the committee that was put together to try to work out a master plan for 5 years. And as we discovered, with there's not a lot of planning you can do for 5 years when this serendipity continues to occur. The Mackinaw boys. We knew that there was a baseball team in Mackinaw City, and we had seen lots of indication of it. We knew that at one time they had played the team on the island, so we wanted to put together vintage baseball. And early in the 2000s, vintage baseball was really hot. There were teams all over the place. And okay, what I do, all right. And but we had no idea how they were dressed. No idea how they were dressed. So we dug up what they call Henleys, those white Henley shirts, red suspenders, and Levi's, and thought that looked, and those red wool hats that the guys just absolutely loved. And they thought that looks pretty historically baseball-y. So we went to work with the team, and whoops, I don't have that other picture, I guess. But I think Sandy found a picture in some archive somewhere of the team playing the team on the island in 1895, and a very clear picture of what the uniforms looked like. So we got a historic seamstress out of Connecticut to make the uniforms that the guys play in today. Now, it was interesting because, and this is how we used to work with the village. The village at that point in time had capital money, but was short on expense money. And the village was going to buy these uniforms, but didn't have the expense money. We had expense money because we'd started getting these donations in, but we had no capital money. So we bought the uniforms, gave them to the village, and the village gave us a lawnmower. Worked like a charm. Whoops. This little, this again is backing up a bit, going through the woods, putting the road through. You can see the trees are in now, and that's the little booth. I got that from the state parks. There were a couple of them sitting around that used to be old admission booths for the state park, and they gave us one of them, and it's still in the park. We moved it inside the park because we no longer charge admissions. And if you've been out there, that's where the spooky little guy sat in the window. We just got rid of the spooky little guy. I think you've got him, don't you, Marianne?
Oh, no, he's at Greg's house.
Pardon?
He's at Greg Tyson's house.
Okay, all right. But he is
I
gone.
had nothing to do with it.
And this is, we went out one day, we were starting to build the roads around the village, and there's the test house after it was done. And our, at that time, President Kurt Grebe owned an old bulldozer. And unknown to us, Kurt showed up out there one day with his bulldozer and started putting in roads through. And we said, Kurt, probably ought to cool it a little bit. We got Darby to put some roads in for us. Here again, this is people have stepped up Darby Darrow did a ton of work for us out there. And when you look at the level of the work he did and what he charged us, it was amazing. The breaks he gave us. You know, Bill Shepler, we were stuck on how to put beams in the pavilion. And Bill had his guys come out with this lift so that we could be raised up and put the beams up. Enzo Leggio, one year we didn't have transportation for the festival. And Enzo came out with a trolley and drove people around. Just people constantly stepping up, doing little things. This was done. If you'll notice, we have a very historic looking outhouse that's got porta potties inside. This was the little committee building the porta potty shelter. And this is cabin fever dinner, something that was started way back, gone through a lot of iterations, but it's now usually done at Audie's. It's a great March get together. We do some trivia games and we do some catching up on what's been going on for the season. And just a great event. Again, Sandy Pryor, who now has moved away, she and Jerry were very active, and Jerry's still hanging on. He's the one who carved all the statues in town, of course. Judy Bennett, our treasurer, who passed away. There's a memorial on the front gate for Judy. The ice tower. How many of you remember the ice tower? You know, great idea that Jerry and Sandy brought it back from a cruise in Alaska, and it was a huge hit, but we couldn't find an outlet to sell the tickets. You know, you have to have a steady outlet to sell them. You can't sell enough just by people peddling them on the street. So after a few years, it faded out of existence. This is one of the school classes. Just to kind of put it in perspective, I know most of the kids in that picture, they are now out of college. They're all now out of college. And I'm sure we're much brighter because of their education in Heritage Village. This is another amazing bit of serendipity. Got a call on a Friday night. The saw that had cut the timbers for the Sioux locks was being disposed of. And they heard we had a historic village. Did we want it? And we said, yes, we'd be very interested in it. It fit our time frame perfectly. And then they said, great, you got to have it out of here by next Friday. And a caravan, literally a caravan of vans, pickup trucks, everything went up to the locks, disassembled the thing like you disassembled a Rector set, labeled everything with little tags, you know, screw A, slot B, so forth and so on, set it on the floor out at Doc's barn out on Central Avenue, where it sat for 2 years. And Greg Harwick, the guy you just elected back to the board tonight, spent 2 years alone, single-handedly, building the building that houses that entire sawmill now. And we're working still. We have a Sven Severin 2-banger engine that will drive it someday. Memorial Day parades we participated in almost every year, with everything from logging to the baseball players. Recent years we have our truck in it. The school, lots of people, pretext. I like that, Sandy. Kids would roll in the grass, but we've done, and I think we're back into more school trips, right? Yes, good. And we've had, my wife has done some teaching, Sandy has, Mary Ann has. I know several of the teachers from the school have participated. We've just had a great turnout teaching people the way they were taught in the 1880s. These are some of the drawings the kids left to say thank you. That was the old original sign. That's gone now. There was the original face of the Artifacts building. That now is closed in, big windows. That's where the 1922 white truck sits. There again, serendipity. I'm talking to a neighbor and he's showing me this truck he's got for sale. And I think he was asking $50,000 for it. A 1922 pickup truck that was built, it's only about 4.5 feet wide because it was built for the alleys of New York. It was built for Bonwit Teller in New York. And so we're chatting about it, and he was talking about having it on the market. He just turned to me and he said, "Would you like it?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Do you want it out the village?" And I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "We'll give it to you." So it's just the Detweiler house. This is a old house we found out on Red School Road. It is actually a log cabin built in the 1880s, 90s, I believe. He was a preacher, a Mennonite preacher. And the amazing thing about that house is it is held together just by by gravity. There's no nails, no nothing. It just fits together. And it's built, the logs sit on top of one another, and then they're filled with split wood and covered with something called chinking. And we'll get to the chinking in a minute here. There's a picture of Judy, some more of the trees, putting in the whole memorial garden. These were more at the festival. Yes, we even had a game, History is a Ball. We got a game scheduled with the Harlem Globetrotters. And we had a very good turnout at the gym in Sheboygan as a fundraiser. It was a fun night. Dave Wallace, who was on our board at the time, organized it. This is putting the roof on, I believe this was the church. Dick Mole doing, no, that was the pavilion, putting the pavilion together. The chapel. We found this out on Red School Road. And when we found it, as you can see in the picture at the bottom, it had about a 30-degree list from west to east. And this picture was taken in November. The roof was completely rotted. And we knew that it was not going to go through the winter, that it was going to go down. And if it went down, they're not salvageable. So we started working with a group. They went out, plan A, dig around it, lift it, take it to the village by cutting the top off. By the time we got there, we were on about plan F, because turned out the only thing holding the whole floor together was an old piece of brown carpeting. The wood underneath was gone. So it was quite a challenge. They cut all the corners, took the 4 pieces, laid them down, cut the bottoms off because they were rotted, rebuilt the bottoms so the church is a foot shorter than it used to be, put it back together. And if you see those pegs in every single slot between the studs, they put a peg that was sharpened 2x4. And then when they set the roof down, they set it down, those pegs slid right up into the holes, and they nailed it, and it was back together. The interesting part, that's the roof. There was not a driver within 100 miles of here that didn't hate us that day. We had the whole road tied up bringing this thing up here. It was in December and it was snowing. It was not good. This was the little shed we built, the front entryway, what's now the north entrance. And then this was a wigwam that we had put together. 2012, 10 through 12 was really a busy year. We had signed a contract with some heirs of the Stimson home, Denny Micus and his wife. We actually had pictures of what the old the old Stimson house looked like. And the only 2 families that ever lived in it were the Greebys and the Stimsons. And between them, they had pictures enough to make it possible for Rick Newman, a historic architect, to draw it to scale including all the prep work and everything. And we built that from scratch, right on the premise. That was going on at the same time we were rebuilding the church. So 2010 to 2012, the church alone has over 10,000 hours volunteer time. Gardening, we had a beautiful garden out there. Danny Micas ran a kids program for the school. So the kids came out, did the program, harvested the vegetables. We had plowing of the fields so they could see how that was done. We had an archaeological team come in from central Michigan. These were quilters. The church is designed so that all the pews can be moved. And we had quilters come in several years in a row to do major quilting. This is in 2013. We put a new cross. The old cross is on display inside the church, but the new cross went on in 2013, and the church was dedicated as a house of worship. And Lou Vasilakis and I put the flooring in. We got some California yellow pine, and we put the flooring in. It took us days and days to do it. It was the middle of August. I kept wanting to take a few days off. He kept saying, no, let's go, let's keep going. Well, I found out that in September, his daughter wanted to get married there. So he needed a floor. So we got it done. 2014, that's when we got the old white truck. Here again is that Detweiler house, now on its foundation. And that's Susie Safford and Pan Gottschalk, who were affectionately known as the chinking chicks. They spent hour after hour after hour doing that cement chinking to put that house back together. But here again, we're doing all the work ourselves. You know, we the Historic Society, its members, we're doing all the work ourselves. This is one of the festivals. We had a group of quilters and knitters, spinners. We also held a discovery camp that year, which was very successful. Used to do a huge Halloween celebration. A ghost supper to honor the indigenous people of this area. One of our members does a ghost supper. It's coming up now in October. We do a Christmas service in the Christmas in Mackinaw in the chapel. It's just an absolutely beautiful service. The chapel looks great. It's cold, so if you come, wear a coat. 2015, a fashion show, and of course the maypole. And then we moved the water park, donated that little building so we could put together a little nature center that Mary Ann was very involved in putting together. Has a nice display in there. And then we put in a garden, a wheel of historic significance at the Indigenous Peoples display. And then we contracted, if you go into the Hook restaurant, go in past the hostess desk, and we have a museum in there. Very nice museum that we set up with the Legios, and it's beautiful panels and glass cases full of artifacts. It's extremely well done. 2020 May Woods, the biggest serendipity of all. Talking to a lady out there one day, and she was asking me a bunch of questions. Next day she was back again. The third day she came with another lady who was asking me a bunch of questions. Only the third lady was asking weird questions, and I kind of got the idea she might be a lawyer. And at the end of that conversation, the lady said, I'm one of the members of the family that founded Point Nipigon, and the family is having a huge land dispute over all the lands. And one of the lands is the 100 acres south of you. And she says, if you want me to get it, I'll give it to you. So she got it, Virginia May, she got it. We named it May Woods. It is now a beautiful, beautiful group of nature trails. And let's see, that's Greg working on the nature center and doing some work on the entryway to the pest house. These are the fourth graders visiting in 2022. Angie, working with them. Again, another shot of cabin fever. And Greg with his, you can see how big that blade is. That's Greg with his sawmill. This is the little jam session they do on Sundays now. And that shed opens in front. It is just full of old farm machinery. This was the Christmas service. And that's Larry doing a lot of work. And I know that Martha and Pat did a whole lot of work out there in the woods. 2023, the general store is just gorgeous. We've repurposed a part of the artifacts building, and the general store is now an artifacts building. The artifacts building is now a general store. You're stocked with just all kinds of neat old stuff, and just really worth stopping in to see. That's the dog parade we have the day before the festival. And here's just some different works going on. We built we had a utility post standing in the middle that we built around. And then we got an ice house from the Cope family in Levering, or I'm sorry, Carp Lake. And again, one of those, they had to do some things with their property. Building was torn down. Do you want it? We took it, set it up, and now it is just a beautiful ice house display out there. These are all of our past presidents, starting with Sandy's over there in the middle, president again, R.J. Planasek, Kurt Grebe, Ray Roth, Susie Safford, Sandy Planasek, myself, Kathy, yeah, and of course Larry on the end just passed away suddenly just here a few months ago. Ken Tyson, Dorothy Kruger, and Keith Necht. Those are all the past presidents. And we've got some new board members, some young folks, and lots of folks coming in. There's the village. And if you sit out there someday, as I've done many times, and just stood there and realized that in 2003, there was nothing there but farmland. Nothing there but farmland. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing that a group that was just formed in 1997 could get to that point with all that activity, all the things we do every year, and be as active as we are in just these few years. And there's more things coming in all the time. So it's a great place to be, great place to work. Disappointments, we have $100 and some thousand in an account for a barn, and prior to the pandemic, there was an estimate of about $150,000 to $200,000 to build this barn, all with rough hewn lumber, pegs instead of nails. I mean, built the old way. And of course, 1920, everything got shut down. When we got back at it in 21, that estimate had ballooned to $450,000. So they said, wait a year and lumber will come back down. So we waited a year, 2022, lumber had come way back down like they promised, but everything else, excavating, masonry, and everything else had gone up. So the estimate was $450,000. So we are really stymied right now as what we're going to do with the barn. We do have some money, and we're working on a railroad presence out there, trying to put in maybe some track, build a depot. Would like to eventually maybe bring in an old engine, but we're working on that. We've got, as I say, couple thousand volunteers and a couple $1 million and we're on the road. So that's where we've been, somewhat about where we're going. Any questions at all about what we're doing, what we've done, who we are? You know, it's been an amazing journey. Any questions at all? Then I will ask you one more time, what in the world are you doing here tonight? Thank you for coming. There's some cookies, water in the back. Really appreciate it. And we can use all the help we can get. You know, and when I say that, we have people who work a couple hours a month. We have people who work almost 40 hours a week. So you can do just about anything from gardening to painting to decorating rooms to helping with the guests to helping with the schoolhouse. I mean, there's just a million things you can do out there. And I guess, like I said, we'll just kind of hang around till the maples touch. Thank you.
Thank everyone for coming, and we should probably remind everyone of the upcoming dates. The Ghost Supper, which is a potluck where you bring a dish that was a favorite of a relative of yours, a deceased relative, and this is a celebration of those in your family who are deceased. And so you bring a dish to share that your mother or whatever value. And then it's a sharing ceremony, a Native American sharing ceremony. And that's on the 29th from 1 to 4 out there. They're going to cook, I understand, geese, wild geese, because it's a Native American program. So goose will be served, it'll be cooked right there. And then whatever people bring for a potluck. The next thing after that, we have another speaker on November 11th. Andy Mortland speaking on the history of pasties. And so I assume she's managing to bring pasties. So we'll probably have pasties. That's November 11th at 7 p.m. And then our next big program is Christmas at Mackinaw in the chapel, December 2nd from 2 to 4. And as Bill said, it's a beautiful service. It's a beautiful time of year, and it's cold in the chapel. We don't have heat, so wear your coat and your muffs and gloves and boots. So again, thank you all for coming, and those pieces of information are on our website. So help yourself to cookies. Donna brought cookies for us tonight. And so help yourself in the back. There's cookies and drink.
I didn't got it.
Yeah, that was very good.
Thank you.
What's up?